All right, hopefully that's the right mic and the right volume, and we're off and running. So, good afternoon, everyone. And as I say, it's afternoon because it's about 5-6 minutes after 12, which means we're starting late. Because the class officially starts at 12. And does anybody remember the last time we started at 12? No. It's been quite some time since we started at 12.
That's because you're kind to those of us who travel far distance.
I'm kind to those that travel far distances, that are the typical wandering Jews that have far to go. But there is sort of a common conventional term for this notion in Jewish circles.
Start earlier. No, what is
Jewish Standard Time, right? We're starting on Jewish time, which is always 5, 10, 15, 40 minutes late. It can be a prolonged difference between the time on the invitation and the time the event actually takes place. But we don't seem to mind, do we?
No.
Right? I mean, does this really bother us? If it really, apparently not, exactly. If it really bothered us, we would have changed it sometime over the last few thousand years.
Except that many years ago, we arrived at a wedding late because we thought it was going to be Jewish time. And it started right on the dot.
And it was a Jewish wedding?
It was a Jewish wedding. And the rhymes and the dates.
Oh, hold on, wait a minute. I have to challenge this. He says he's never ever seen a Jewish wedding on start. A wedding is one of the few ceremonies where, as long as everybody who needs to be there, as far as the ceremony is concerned, is there, I start on time. Because I know that there is a whole orchestrated set of events that are taking place based upon a start time for the ceremony. And when I meet with the couples and go through it with the families, I explain to them, don't come late for the wedding.
Except when you have carpentry duties that you have to perform.
Well, we have to do a few minor adjustment of things, yes, but that was a delay, not lateness. Occasionally there are delays that throw themselves in, but I'm talking about just generically being comfortable with the fact that people show up late. It's something that Judaism has gotten used to. And I'd like to posit that the reason why we are fine with Jewish Standard Time is because of this week's Torah portion.
Well done.
Yeah. I wasn't just chatting. That's what I try. I've been waiting. Everybody comes late every week, and I've been waiting to use it for constructive purpose. So, our parashah this week is Tisa, which is one of the most famous parashiot, or at least contains some of the most famous episodes in our early nationhood, and in particular, we're going to be talking about a shiny cow, meaning the golden calf, exactly, which was built presumably because our ancestors were not yet familiar, having only just become a true nation, with the notion of Jewish Standard Time. Had we been there, we would not have built the golden calf, because we would have been not surprised that things were a bit late. We'll see. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's our opening theory. Let's see what actually happens. So we are in the book of Exodus, obviously, and chapter 32 is where we're going to start, which is on page 529, if you're in the Eitz Chaim Chumashim. 529. The story so far: Moses has led the people to Mount Sinai. There has been the revelation of God at Mount Sinai, and then Moses has gone up the mountain. We got that? Yes? And now the people are waiting for him to come back. And that's where the curtain lifts and our story begins, with our volunteer reader of Edie, thanks.
32, you say?
32, verse 1.
Okay. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him."
All right, pause there. They're getting a little nervous. They're getting a little antsy. Well, what in the world's going on here? Moses goes up the mountain, and 40 days later, they're freaking out and building an idol. They've already received the Ten Commandments, which says expressly, no idols. And think about poor Aaron. Think about poor Aaron. Not only that he's being now asked to build an idol on behalf of the people, but he's getting bypassed for an inanimate object. Right? Hey, your brother, the guy that led us, the wonderful man who has the connection to God, he's not coming back. You'd expect him to say, could you lead us? But instead they say, would you mind building this for me? It's the ultimate being in the friend zone. You know, he should have been the fallback when they have this problem with Moses. They should have bumped over to Aaron, and instead they skip him and go straight to a statue. Feel sorry for the guy. We're not going to feel too sorry for him too long because he goes along with it. But it is a shame that he didn't even get second fiddle to his brother Moses.
And when
But
Moses went up on the mountain, he didn't say, while I'm gone, you should listen to Aaron.
he absolutely said, while I'm gone, you should listen to Aaron and Hur. And they're listening to him by telling him what they want. That's the way the masses work. Is they listen to their leaders as long as the leaders do what they want. And so what they want is something to represent this force that is leading them out of the land of Egypt. So keep reading.
Well, maybe Aaron really had nothing to say either. His brother has disappeared, left him no instructions what to do if he just vanishes for a month and a half. And so maybe, because Aaron could have said, oh, wait, I can tell you we will, but he doesn't know what to say.
How about wait?
For how long?
Or God will show us.
We're schlepping through this sand. There's nothing but sand. You keep us moving. You say, we've got to get over there.
Wait, hold on, There's nothing but sand? Nothing but sand?
It's the desert.
We have had ourselves be led to the mountain by a pillar of fire and cloud.
Yeah.
We have heard God emanating from the mountain. We have seen Moses go up into this tempest at the top. There's no reason why the people should have been nervous. Right? They still presumably have the cloud that rested across the camp every time we encamped. And the rules had been that when the cloud moved, we moved. And when the cloud stopped, we stopped. Right? And pillar of fire and all of that. So God's presence has not suddenly vanished from the camp. There still is every indication that there had been for all the days prior that God is still connected to the people.
And free lunch.
And free lunch, thank you. Free lunch and free dinner and breakfast, exactly. We're getting 2 meals a day and double on Friday. Why panic?
Well, how long is 40 days? How long has it been since the first day of Exodus?
I mean, since we'd actually left the land of Egypt. It took us 50 days to go from Pesach to the giving of the Torah, and then Moses went up. So
it's about double the amount of time.
Yep.
Since the.
So we've been now waiting for Moses to come down just about as long as it took us to get from Egypt to the giving of the Torah in the first place. It's significant. It's very significant. But all the other signs of God's presence and connection to the people have not disappeared. So maybe lengthy, but no, we can't wait a little bit longer rather than jumping to a specific action which has been specifically forbidden. Rather than saying, Moses isn't coming down, Aaron, can we have a committee meeting to discuss this? The usual response to Jewish institutions in crisis, let's have a committee. They jump straight to the idol as an answer.
Didn't Moses go up the mountain in order to get the commandments? He breaks them on the way down. So these people haven't seen the commandment yet that said don't have an idol.
Okay. So that there is a much longer discussion, which most commentators believe that the people may not have heard every single word of the Ten Commandments coming from God, but that all the people were present when the Ten Commandments were given. There's some difference of opinion based upon whether the people heard the first commandment, whether they heard all the commandments, whether they only heard the Aleph of Anochi. There's some differences of opinion on that. But the Ten Commandments had been given and relayed at least to the people prior to Moses going up for the written copy. So he may have gone up for the written copy, but they heard something. And unlike the Charlton Heston film, they knew that idols were off limits. Just like they knew murder and all the other things in the Charlton Heston movie were off limits. There wasn't just Moses up on a rock with the lightning bolts coming out of the sky. That was just the written version. The oral version had already been given.
So the 50 days is from when the first 10 commandments came, or when he came down the mountain?
No, the 50 days is supposed to be from when we left Egypt, from Pesach to Shavuot to
Which is when he came down the mountain.
No, to the theophany, the actual utterances of the Ten Commandments, not the printed version. Right, the Ten Commandments were given in oral form first, and then he got the hard copy.
The hard copy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the real hard copy. All right, a little bit more.
Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance.
All right, that part Charlton Heston movie got right, the dancing. Who are they worshiping?
The Lord and calf.
Who are they worshiping? What's the name they're giving to this calf? Is it Chet? Is it, Anubis? Is it Baal? Is it, Ishtar? What's the name of the god they're worshiping through this calf? Adonai. Adonai. They're still worshiping Yud, Hey, and Vav, and Hey. They're worshiping the right God. They're not saying it was Baal that took us out. They're not saying it was Anubis that took us out. They're still referring to the correct target of their worship. They're just using a very inappropriate medium to get there. And so it's important because we often view the idolatry of the golden calf as being the purest form of idolatry, which is worshiping false gods through false idols. But they were worshiping the correct God through false idols. And they were doing so because they were scared.
And they needed something
They
tangible to
needed
look
something
at.
to see.
Yeah,
They-
touch.
They felt they needed something to see.
Something, yeah,
And when they didn't have the man that was such an obvious connection to God, the one who had performed all the miracles and led them, they wanted something else tangible. They weren't looking to abandon God, but they did want something to hold on to. And they didn't wait very long. Or did they? Right? How long was Moses supposed to be gone?
That's a long time to wait when you don't know what you're waiting for.
Well, that's the question. Did the people know when Moses was supposed to come back or not? Let's find out. There's a midrash. There's always a midrash. Of course. What a surprise. So we're going to start off with a very famous midrash, and then we're going to get a little more obscure. But if you don't know this midrash already, then I'm very glad that I'm bringing it because it's one of the most famous midrashim that surrounds the giving of the Ten Commandments and surrounds the story of the golden calf. And you should know it. Whether or not you agree with all the details, whether or not you have a particular interpretation, well, that's part of our discussion. But knowing this midrash is part of basic Jewish literacy. All right, do we have copies all around? We have copies all around. Edie, I'm going to go ahead and lean on you to keep reading if you don't mind.
Okay. When Moses went up to the mountain, he said, "At the end of 40 days, I will come within 6 hours."
All right, within 6 hours is before midday. All right, remember, Jewish calendar, Jewish hours are measured for days, hours of daylight. So 6 hours means before the middle of that period of 12 hours of daylight. The hours are relative depending upon the time of the year. But you could always tell 6 hours because that's when the sun was straight overhead. So this midrash says, Moses told them when he would come. 40 days. Wait here, I'll be right back. And I'll be back before midday.
They thought that the day he went up was included in the count, but the day of his ascent did not have its night included with it because Moses is sending in the morning. Thus the 40th day was the 17th of Tammuz.
All right, let's make sure we got the math right here before we get to the main character of the Midrash. So the math is saying they thought the day he left counted as day 1. But Moses meant that the day he left was day 0, and the next day, beginning, when do Jewish days begin? In the evening, would start the count for that evening. And because he left in the morning, he couldn't include, in Moses' count, he couldn't include the day he was leaving because he wasn't gone a full 40 days because he left in the morning, not from the night.
His travel day.
It's his travel day, exactly. Now, in Jewish law, there is usually a principle, where the people are generally right, that you include part of a day as a day. This includes, for example, for Shiva, which is where it comes up most often in the average person's life. So the day of burial is included as the first day of Shiva. Well, apparently Moses had a slightly different count than the people, which means, how late was Moses? A day. A day? And they jumped to the golden calf? I mean, Jewish Standard Time, come on, give the guy a break. He's gone 40 days. If he's only going to be gone one extra day, he's only a 40th late. That's not so bad. I mean, I give you guys 5 minutes sometimes for being late, and that's a much higher percentage of our class time. So why would they jump to this conclusion?
On the 16th, Satan came and brought confusion into the world and showed a semblance of darkness and confusion, as if showing that Moses had surely died, and therefore confusion had come upon the world. Satan said to them, Moses has died, for 6 additional hours have already passed, and he has not come,
Etc. He didn't actually say etc. So why did they jump to the conclusion? The devil made him do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, we're going to call this force Satan rather than the devil, because there's very different ideas that attach to those two words. Satan is a Jewish word, a Hebrew word. The devil ain't, and the concept is very different. So the figure of Satan in biblical literature, predating at least Christian literature, is very different than you see in movies. He really has had a lousy agent. And the character has been played by people that I'm sure the original Satan would be very upset by. So the original concept of Satan is represented in the book of Zechariah, and in the book of Iyov, is the adversary. And it doesn't mean the adversary in terms of good versus evil adversary. He's not the opponent of God. He's the opponent of man. He's our opponent. And he's not opposing us because he wants our souls, or he's, just really keen on bad stuff happening. He opposes us because he knows that we're unrighteous. And we're not deserving of Torah. We're not deserving of our connection to God. He is the ultimate vision of strict and unforgiving justice. And so Satan figures in many stories throughout biblical texts as the person who says, "Get them, God. Punish them. Don't trust them. Don't think they're so righteous." In Zechariah, when he attacks the new high priest from the return from Babylon, he says he's not worthy to be the high priest, to stand in your holy of holies. Don't allow it to happen. God overrules him. When Job comes along as being such a righteous man, and God says, "Look at how righteous he is," Satan doesn't say, "I'm going to get evil." He says, "He's only righteous because you haven't tested him. But I'll prove to you that he is in fact as fallible and as pathetic as every other human being by bending him until he breaks," which he does. So he's our enemy, and he doesn't make our life any easier in the biblical concept. But he's not the horns and tail and pitchfork kind of devil or demon that is seen in other renderings. So in this case, Satan is convincing the people that Moses is late. Why? So that we fall apart. So that we sin. So that we show our true colors. that if push comes to shove, if there is the slightest setback, that we will betray God. And then he can point to God and point to us and say, God, look at them. Look at that. You're giving them Torah? You're going to make them your people? Look, guys, a day late, and they're already off cavorting with idols. Really? Chuck it in. Dustbin of history, start again. Was Satan there? All right. Who here, if they were going to cast the movie, would be looking for someone to play the role of Satan? Who here, if you were directing the movie, would be saying, all right, so we're going to have a crowd of Israelites over here, right, the Sinai in the backdrop, and there's going to be this poof of smoke. And out of that smoke is going to come this guy with hooves and horns and a tail and a pitchfork, and he's going to say, Moses is dead. You lose faith, ha 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 ha, and then go poof and disappear again. Is that what the Midrash is telling us happened? That there was a physical or even visual manifestation of Satan that caused the people to do what they did? Look at it carefully. How did Satan convince them of it? Confusion and darkness. The people saw what was happening, and they interpreted the events as being, well, man, if it looks like that, I bet Moses is gone. Because he's been gone a long time, and it's already late. We need something else. Satan didn't say these words. The people said these words in their own hearts. It was what we would call, in more common Jewish parlance, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And it's what led us to make these actions. But we personify the Yetzer Hara. We personify it as a partner with Satan, of tempting us to do wrong, to prove that we're not as righteous as we think, or righteous as God gives us credit for. But it's easy to get hung up on that personification, and to then think of it as something external, which often compromises our ability to deal with it. Following me so far?
I can accept this line of thinking 99.9% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But not after what these people experienced in the last 50 days, 90
Right.
days. All of the miracles, everything that's gone on. I cannot relate to how this happened.
But doesn't it fit the pattern?
No.
We were in Egypt, right? Moses shows up and says, God has sent me. And the people say, yeah, right. So Moses does miracles and says, it's time to go. And the people start going, and they're like, oh, well, now we're stuck at the ocean. Right, so he brought us out here to die? We get through the ocean. And people are like, woo, we're through the ocean. So where's the water? What are we going to drink? He brought us out here to die of thirst? So we get water. Okay, we got water. Well, what are we going to eat? He brought us out here so we could starve to death? Fine. Here's food falling from the sky. All right, so he got us food. Oh, well, now we're getting attacked by the Amalekites. He brought us out here so we could be beaten up by the Amalekites. Time and time again, despite all the miracles, the people have doubted even when Moses was, but even when Moses was present, they doubted God. Even when there was a pillar of fire standing between them and the Egyptians, they doubted God. With Moses gone, they're going to doubt even more, and they'll probably doubt as well that if Moses was constantly intervening and channeling God's support for us, which is how it must have appeared to them, without him, what chance do we have that God's going to actually be on our side in the active way that he has been?
But didn't they all hear the voice of God?
Yes.
Every single person?
Yes?
That has to give people a clue that God does exist.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, no matter how strong of a hint people get that God exists in this world or in this universe or in their life, it's very easy to forget it in moments of panic. It's very easy to forget it in moments of mundane existence. And when fearful, notice they didn't entirely turn away from God. They're turning towards something they think they can control, a physical manifestation, which is what all idols were, which allowed them to control the relationship from their end. Because right now they're desperate to know that they'll still be getting the support and the goodness that God had been providing. And they figure that they'll revert to form, of building something the way every other ancient world or civilization had that would let them control what they thought would provide the goodies.
But it says that the 40th day was the 17th.
Yeah?
On the 16th is when Satan shows up and starts creating confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the people accept what he was dishing out when it was not yet the time?
But it was. So he shows up on the 16th afternoon, right after that 6 hours has gone by. So he shows up on the 16th and says, it's 6 hours have passed and this is a problem. Yes, it takes a little time and we should give them credit. They did wait a little bit longer than immediately doing this at noon, but that's when the process began. That's when the doubt began to seep in. Was the moment their expectations were not met, they began to doubt. That there was no buffer.
I got,
Okay.
I'm feeling like the Midrash here is maybe engaging in a little bit of polemics.
Wouldn't be the first time.
For sure. The text doesn't give us any dialogue between Aaron, Hur, and the people who are dissatisfied, frightened, whatever, who are not doing what Moses told them to do. Go to these two people in my absence.
Right.
For advice. Midrash, rather than filling in that dialogue, has decided, let's not put Aaron and Hur in a position of perhaps not being successful in convincing the people. Let's put Satan in that role. In fact, I think later on in the story, Hur, the people murder him.
Yes.
Right?
So there are midrashim that do what you're talking about. That have Aaron pleading with the people, that have Aaron going through this whole section we just read when he says, bring me your gold. He's doing that deliberately because he thinks they won't. And then it says he throws it in the fire. He's not even really trying to make anything, and the calf comes out. So he takes that as some sort of tacit approval from the forces that be. So Aaron does try to exonerate himself, and the Midrash does work on his behalf to say that he wasn't a complete pushover as he appears from the superficial reading. But I think you're right that there is a polemic going on in here, much more about the internal struggle within each person. That when they were confused, when their expectations of God were delayed, when the signs that they could witness could be so easily interpreted negatively, that they listened to the doubt and the fear that has been with them their whole lives, and that is with all of us. This feeling of, I'm not worthy, that notion of the adversary within ourselves that say we're not worthy of being connected to God. I mean, come on, what am I? Just a sack of bone and tissue, and I get to connect to the transcendent force of the universe. I mean, a rock has as much worth as I do to connect, to talk to God. And also their own panic that they need something, and they desperately want it.
in line with your defense, and you got me defending Moses, I went back to page 479, and it said, the Lord says to Moses, come up on the mountain, wait there, I'll inscribe teachers. So Moses and his 10 Joshua went. Moses ascended the mountain. To the elders he said, wait here for us till we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone as a legal matter approach him. No word about how long he'll be gone.
Nope.
So that would be another midrash.
That is another midrash, yes.
Well, so they made up 40 days. Maybe the midrash should make up that it was 15 days.
Well, no, the 40 days that he's up there, that's attested to. But the fact that he told them it would be 40 days is the midrash. Correct.
That's a midrash. He did not.
That's a midrash.
No, he was up there.
And we're going to get to that.
Oh, good.
We're going to get to the counter Peshat reading that in just a second. But
I would
first,
be just as nervous if I were there with them.
But first we have to unravel this Satan character a little bit more.
We also have to remember that these people had no training or teaching for several generations.
Absolutely, and they didn't have Torah. I mean, every time we want to pick on our ancestors, we have to remember they didn't have Torah. They were just getting the advanced copy. Some of it orally, some of it, in piecemeal, some of it when they went to Moses with questions. They didn't have a Torah sitting in their ark that they could read year after year after year, week after week after week, and study day after day after day. So we shouldn't be surprised that they were confused and made some what we would consider boneheaded mistakes, but I'd like to say in their defense, not just that they were ignorant, but also the attitude that they display is one that all of us display from time to time or very frequently, depending upon the circumstances.
Nothing new under the sun.
No, I've heard that before. That's not a new quote.
And they cried with a loud voice to the Lord their God. What did they say? Here is the one who has destroyed the sanctuary and burned the temple, killed all the righteous, exiled all Israel, and is still dancing around among us. Have you not given him to us so that we may receive a reward through him?
All right, I'm going to pause there, because who are they talking about? Satan. All right, they're talking about the evil inclination. They're talking about this adversary, the one that continually provokes us to break the commandments, and by provoking us, we saw the first temple destroyed, and all sorts of other bad things befall our people.
Fault, it's his fault.
Well, it's his fault, or its fault, because without that provocation, we would be righteous and pure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to have to unravel. Because what exactly is the provocation? But in this particular Agadah, this tale of the Talmud, the rabbis are trying to teach us something about that provocation. But they're starting off with the people lamenting that the first temple had been destroyed, it's now been rebuilt, but the same force that tore down the first temple is still present in the world, which means this second temple may not last either. And so they're asking, surely God, you only gave us this evil inclination, this Yetzer Hara, this adversary that pulls us away from you, because by resisting it, we gain reward. Right? It's counted as to our merit. Right? Who is the greater rock climber? The person who climbs Everest with an oxygen tank, or the person who climbs Everest without an oxygen tank? Who's more impressive? The one without, right? Because he did it with a greater obstacle. I know, we might think idiot, but but we would also be more impressed that he had accomplished something that was greater than the other because he had faced a greater obstacle. And so there was a notion within rabbinic thinking that by overcoming this obstacle and continuing to be righteous despite the Yetzer Hara, we receive greater merit and reward from God. And what is the people's response to that theory?
But we don't want him, and we don't want the reward that comes through suffering inflicted by him.
Keep the reward! just get rid of the Yetzer Hara, get rid of this Satan influence in the world, and even if we don't get the reward that we could have earned had we had it, I'll take the oxygen tank, thank you, and not struggle, and not have to continually fight against this pull towards things that will cause me to violate the commandments and thereby set my life in the downward spiral. So the people are fed up with fighting against this force. So they take action. Edie?
They ordained a fast for 3 days and nights, and he came forth from the temple in the form of a fiery lion. Said the prophet to Israel, this is the impulse to worship idols. As they grabbed him, a hair of his beard fell out. He cried out. They said, so what do we do now? Is it possible, God forbid, that they have mercy on him from heaven? Throw him into a lead pot, for lead absorbs sound.
All right, a little bit of a digression here, but it's just an interesting notion. So they pray and pray and pray, fast 3 days and 3 nights. This is their commitment, their dedication. And the form of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, emerges from the temple. And they grab it. They're going to wrestle it down. But in the ensuing struggle, just a hair from the beard falls out, and the thing cries out, and they're worried that its crying out in pain is going to elicit mercy from heaven. Because heaven has mercy upon all that are afflicted and all that are in pain. So their solution is to stuff it into a lead pot. Because that way they won't be able to hear its cries in heaven. Now, this is not meant, again, as a hyper-literal text. This is meant very metaphorically, that we should already be getting an inkling that their concept of Satan, of the Yetzer Hara, is different. If they can imagine that there would be mercy shown to this force that we only perceive as evil, then already they have a much different conception than you would see in most modern movies or books. All right, so they stuff it into a pot.
He said to them, if you kill me, the world will come to an end.
Away with your lies, Satan, right? He's lying, of course. No, he's actually telling the truth.
They put him into prison for 3 days, and then they went looking for a day-old egg in the whole of the land of Israel, but it was not to be found.
Okay. No, you can't find an egg, so you're going to back out of this wonderful strategy of getting rid of the force of evil for all time?
Well, the life force has now left.
The life force?
The life force is an egg.
God is the life force, right?
Yeah, well, chickens stop laying eggs and people stop doing things to make babies.
Okay. That second part there. How do eggs get laid? What do you need? Don't just tell me a chicken. You need a rooster, right? You need a chick, you need a hen, and you need a rooster, and you need them to do the birds and the bees thing. Ideally, I mean, there's all sorts of ways of manufacturing and getting chickens to do it. Now, back then, that was pretty much the way you did it. And what they're talking about here is saying is that with the Yetzer Hara subdued and removed from the world, the desire to do many things in the world, birds and bees things, was also removed. Which means if we completely destroyed the Yetzer Hara, if we obliterated it, life would be over. So it's not evil. It's very important to understand that. It's why the term evil inclination is so misleading. It's not evil. It's an inclination towards things that lead, if unchecked, to evil. Or the whiteboard. All right. It's a set of appetites and desires that in and of themselves are not bad, but in combination and as allowed to run unchecked, will be bad.
Much more than not bad. They're inclinations that are critical to our survival.
Exactly. Which is exactly what the rabbis are trying to say here, which is you cannot, they're talking not just about Israel as a nation, but as an individual, you cannot purge yourself entirely of these desires, and you should not. The notion of living an ascetic life of a monk, celibate and eating only air and all of those sorts of things is not just impossible by their view, it's an anathema to the existence that God has given us. But you still want to control it. You still need to limit it. You can't let the Yetzer Hara just run free. And that's where they're stuck. They know that they could vanquish it, is the agata here. They could destroy it completely. But if they did so, then life itself would just run out.
Well, an example I would think would be the desire to eat. We want to eat. Now, we take it too far, it's gluttony. But the desire to eat leads you to plant crops, grow them, have a farm, to grow enough stuff to feed the other people.
Mm-hmm.
Without that, life stops. But if you take it to the point where, I don't know, you're not only are you gluttonous, you're eating everything in sight, and you're cheating other people to have this farm,
Mm-hmm.
that's not good. It's up to us to know
Not so good.
where to draw the line. Oh.
Go ahead.
I'm surely missing something. That makes sense, this makes sense, that makes sense. But I don't think you can a little bit do a golden calf.
Okay.
That's it.
Right.
I don't worship, no, not a little bit, not things
Right.
that lead up
But it
to.
represented Adonai to them. That was a little bit. It half represents Adonai. It's not Baal. It's not.
Any idol represents what anybody.
We would have had to have a
thinks is
discussion in the
Adonai.
desert, you and I. Yes.
Exactly. So the Yetzer Hara does not mean, the Yetzer Hara being a necessary part is true, and it's not a necessary drive to idols. The Yetzer Hara that leads us towards idolatry is the Yetzer Hara that wants attachment, that wants affection, and that wants to be part of the universe more than we've necessarily seen.
This is not Yetzer Tov.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Attachment, affection can lead to many of the most destructive behaviors in our life. Jealousy is an overabundance of affection.
But an overabundance of anything can do that. Mercy can do that. Charity can do that. Anything that is one of God's midot of rachamim
Correct.
can do that.
Correct.
It's
But-
kind of
It is convoluted, but again, to go back to the example from the actual golden calf, the people were not turning to the golden calf to turn away from God. They were turning towards the golden calf in their fear. It was their fear, their mistrust, their doubt that led them to want something that would be a bridge for what they were attracted to, which was God. The Yetzer Hara gave them the wrong answer. But the impetus of wanting that connection, yes, is something that is necessary. So we don't think of the Yetzer Hara just as being drawing us towards bad things, and that's why it's so insidious. The Yetzer Hara doesn't just draw us towards bad things. It holds out good things that we overshoot and end up with a bad thing. I mean, think for a second about loving God so much and not wanting God to be absent from your life even for 1 second, that you build an idol.
Right.
It's exactly the right feeling, but it's been twisted by the doubt and the fear and the misunderstanding and a sense of greed and of over-wanting that you end up fulfilling it in such a completely negative way.
But look at how angry God was.
Mm-hmm.
If God, in my mind, looked at the people and all they saw was love of God and they just needed this golden calf
Right.
to get closer to God,
Mm-hmm.
I think a merciful God will look at that and say, these guys, they made a mistake, but they didn't make a horrible mistake.
Right idea.
They didn't make a mistake that's worthy of death.
Right.
There's much more going on here than this was just a simple mistake.
So let me put it this way. It's Father's Day. And the kids want to make you breakfast in bed. So they go into the kitchen and they make some toast and they butter it and they get some orange juice for you and they put a little flour in the newspaper on the tray and they bring it in. It's lovely, it's nice. You go into the kitchen after you get out of bed and it's just a disaster. Right? The butter is all over the place, the milk has been spilt, the orange juice is on the ceiling, and you're going to spend the rest of Father's Day cleaning up. You would probably balance your anger at their mess with your pleasure at their intent. Let's imagine instead you go out and the oven is still on full blast and it is scorching the wall behind it and the hood over the top of it, and that there is, a bucket of cooking oil right next to it. Do you think your reaction to them is going to be rather pointed despite their best intentions?
The reaction would not be, I'm going to kill. I mean, literally, I'm going to kill these kids.
Right. But
And find another bunch of.
okay, let's put it.
The analogy breaks down.
But that's where the analogy breaks down. If you assume that was actually what God was planning to do, if you assume instead that what God was trying to do by that language was to give an alarm to every later generation.
But he really killed the people.
Only the worst. He didn't kill all of them. Only the worst. Only those that would have had this desire incurably embedded within them. And at this stage, according to many of our sages, at this stage of our national development, it was an unfortunate sickness that had to be amputated. But later on, not so much.
But later on, he doesn't accompany them into the land.
Correct.
All of this is behind, he's still angry as hell.
No, he does accompany. Through the
He's an
Mishkan.
angel.
Through the Mishkan. So that's the compromise.
It's not through the cloud.
That's the compromise. Is that eventually works out. All right, let's move on a little bit because we're not going to handle the evil in the world, but I want to get to a couple other important opinions on this topic and how we view it in the world in our own lives, because it's very easy to make mistakes in both ways. So we're going to actually skip there's this notion here that they have to release it, but they blind it, so at least some of the worst inclinations we have are left behind. In particular, they mention incest. But let's move down to that final paragraph, Edie, the one that begins with the word Moses.
Moses did not tell them that he would descend at the end of 40 days, and perhaps he himself did not know initially how long he would be on the mountain.
All right, so that's Harriet's point. She goes back to reading from the earlier verse. Moses says, wait here till I get back. No notion of time, no notion of a due date for his return. So Abarbanel is arguing with the Midrash, saying that yes, the Midrash teaches us some very important things, but don't think that's literally what happened, because literally Moses went up the mountain and said, I'll be back when I'm back. So then we have to deal with the question of, why did the people panic when they did?
And they gathered to Aaron at the end of many days and said to him each day, Arise, fashion for us gods that will go before us, for this man Moshe, we know not what has happened.
All right, don't turn the page. Don't turn the page. We gotta, is this the way you eat, right? You take bites and bites and just eat, and on to the next dish, on to the next course, on to the next dessert. Now let's leave. No, enjoy what we just chewed. Chew your food before you swallow. All right. So what's Abarbanel saying? What has he added to this conversation, or given as a different twist of why the people built the calf when they did?
Kept bothering Aaron over and over to do it.
Kept bothering? Okay, we can make it a little bit stronger. Aaron now resisted them for a longer period of time. And the people were worried, not just because Moses was an hour late. The people were growing restless day after day after day. After all, how long can a person live up in a mountain without anything? Right? I mean, did you see him? Was he carrying a big backpack? Did he have a motorhome with him? I mean, what's he doing up there? People were getting more and more anxious, and we can see a more gradual progression of their fear, their confusion, and their doubt, which actually may contradict the literal reading of the Midrash, but works in harmony with this notion of the Yetzer Hara. That sometimes it's a gradual, growing sense of anxiety or doubt or desires that lead us off the path. It's not we just wake up one morning and think, let's do evil. But that it is a small, incremental thing that eventually couldn't be resisted. Eventually Aaron gave in. Which is a sad thing, but it's much more understandable than, well, we'll give him another 5 minutes. If he's not here, we're building an idol. Which seems a little sudden. Okay. So how do we understand this Yetzer Hara, this evil inclination, this Satan, these forces outside of us, this beyond the control in the modern world? Well, we're going to go to our good friend Shadal for the back page, 18th century or 19th century commentator who lived in something similar to our modern world and tried to help bring some of these notions together in a way that we might find a little bit easier to understand. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he writes in longer paragraphs. That's one of the things. If you want clarity of opinion, you have to read more words. If you want short, pithy opinions like the Midrash, then you get fewer words. That's why you should not be upset that the Torah is the length it is. If God had taken the time to spell everything out in detail, we wouldn't get through it in one lifetime. Okay.
When a person counts his gold, or when the king counts his army, he will trust in his wealth and large army, become arrogant and say, with my strength I have accomplished this, or will accomplish this. And then, in most instances, the wheel of fortune will turn upon him and bring him unanticipated destruction. For indeed, this is one of the laws of providence. Pride goes before destruction, and this is true, and shown to be true in all the generations, both for individuals, nations, and kings.
All right, this is a truism, says Shadal, that is recognized worldwide, globally. This is not just a truism that came only because we've read from the book of Proverbs, from Mishlei, or just because we have Torah, but you go around the world and ask people their stories and ask people their wisdom, and they'll tell you very much the same. You say, I'm on top of the world, I did this, look at my might, look at my wealth, look at what I've accomplished, it's me, 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 me. And you can be sure that as soon as you turn the page of that story, that person's falling. That seems to be a pattern in life. Okay, but how do we explain it then?
And from this was born all the nations, the belief in Ayin Hara, the evil eye.
Right?
And
The evil eye, poo.
And it appears that this belief already spread in Israel in the generations before the giving of the Torah. God did nullify this belief entirely.
Sorry, that's an important typo. God did not.
Oh, okay. God did not
What I get for typing things.
nullify this belief entirely, since it was based on belief in providence, and because it kept a person from trusting in his strength and wealth, and this is the main thrust of the entire Torah.
The idea of not trusting just in yourself is the main thrust of the entire Torah, not the Ayin Hara. But what Shadal is advancing here is a very interesting notion, that people already had a sense of the Ayin Hara, the evil eye, that if you were proud and haughty and arrogant, you would be brought down a notch, and that belief existed prior to the giving of the Torah. And when God gave the Torah, he didn't bother trying to wipe that belief out, the way he did idolatry, for example, because there were useful elements to it. However, most people misunderstand the evil eye, and that's what we're going to try and flesh out a little bit here, so that we can maybe understand it more clearly, rather than thinking of it only in strict superstitious ways.
So he commanded that when they were counted that time, at the start of their nationhood, they should give a kofar,
A redemption.
and that the silver be given to the service in the tent of meeting.
All right, what are we referring to in Shadal?
The census.
The census, which happened at the beginning of Tisa. The beginning of this Torah portion is the taking of the sentence with the silver shekel. And the notion was that people would have already been worried when we were counting. Because, you can't count people. Because if you count people, that's going to invite the Ayin Hara. That's going to get the evil eye. So God knew that people already had this feeling. And so to offset that feeling as well as direct it productively and constructively, he said, don't worry, we're not just counting people, we're taking in the silver to be used in the Mishkan. And that way people would feel, phew, okay, we're fine. It's like if you spill salt, you throw some over your shoulder, and all the other things you do to take away the bad juju from various superstitious things. God's working on the people's natural superstition. I often think that if God had simply told us keeping the mitzvot was good luck, we would have had no problem with people keeping the commandments, because everybody would have. You tell them it's righteous and it's hard, you tell them that it will bring them good luck or bad luck, and all of a sudden people pay attention. You can see the same with often the obsession with segulot, with doing special things that will give you a marriage or give you good prosperity or bring you children, other than simply living a righteous life. Okay.
And I come to the heart of the matter, which is the matter of Ayin Hara. And I say that a few of the philosophers sought to explain it via the laws of nature, and said that the rays which came out of the eyes of the one looking are able to become poisons.
All right, let's make sure we understand here. By philosophers, talking about ancient scientists that believed, literally, that if you looked upon a person with jealousy, your eyes emit influential rays that harm the person you're looking at. It has to be with jealousy. It has to be with this idea of, look at, who does he think he is? Lording it over. Look, why does he have that and I don't? Why that's wrong. That's not fair. That attitude can be projected through your eyes. Not just metaphorically, says some of the ancient scientists, and this was both within Judaism as well as non-Jewish scientists, but quite literally, you can infect a person with your glare. And indeed, there are cultures where looking at a person wrong is considered to be an attack, not merely insulting. Yes. Okay.
And the scholars of our generations are the opposite.
This is the 1900s.
With most of them,
1800s, sorry.
With most of them mocking the belief in Ayin Hara, as well as many of the other things which cannot be understood via the laws of nature. The philosopher looks upon and says that it is random chance, and the masses say that it is a miracle. And in my opinion, both of these are erring.
All right, so Shadal's saying, he uses the word philosopher kind of fungibly, so let me make sure we got that clear. He's saying, on the one hand, you have the logical, rational scientists, and they're saying, you know what, on my meter, I'm not getting anything coming out of these eyeballs. So there's nothing happening here. There's nothing physically happening that could explain the downfall of the arrogant. So therefore, it's just random chance. And you're just writing a story about it and making it into a morality tale, but it's random chance. And on the other hand, You have, as Shadal puts a little more pointedly, and I kind of helped clean it up, the uneducated masses, the great unwashed, and it's a miracle. Everything's a miracle, right? This person was hardy and now he's down, it's a miracle. This person, cheated me at cards last night and then he stubbed his toe on the way home, it's a miracle. Everything is constantly happening around them is through this miraculous means of providence, of checking the balances of everything. But both are wrong, says Shadal.
Rather, the world does not operate on the material laws of nature alone, but rather there are other laws as well, which are the upper wisdom established at the start of creation, which testify to providence.
Okay, so what Shadal has done here, and which I personally find brilliant, is said, yes, there are natural laws, and then there are supernatural laws. That's the important part of what he's adding here. It's not, there's natural laws, but they're constantly being overrun by miracles. It's there's natural laws and supernatural laws. And yeah, you're not going to be able to measure the supernatural laws. Can't get out the microscope, can't get out the EM sensor and test them. But they are there, and they operate because the world was created in such a way that it should come to pass. Not that there is a constant willful choice to make them occur in miraculous ways that supersede the laws. So the law of the universe, the order of the universe, the structure of the universe was set at creation, but it includes what we're seeing here. So it doesn't have to be constant miracles to make it come about.
Sort of like tsunamis, volcanoes, those are natural things occurring. But when someone is rescued or saved, or some town survives, that will be the supernatural laws coming into effect. The natural laws are that this stuff happens.
Let's rather than making up our own example, let's see his own personal example. He has an example.
For example, he decreed that the cold be harsh, and early in the year 5573,
which is 1813,
such that the king of Aritz should fall, and to quiet the world and all in it.
All right, 1813? What's that? Napoleon. Battle of Waterloo. The fall of Napoleon. So what he's saying here is you have this arrogant dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte, who has risen across the backs and blood of Europe to be the despot that's in control of much of the continent. And it was a bad winter that led to his downfall. Now, it wasn't the only thing. There was an awful lot of soldiers that stood on the other side of the army lines and fought back. But without the winter, it is debatable whether or not Napoleon would have lost. What's that? What a can of worms. What a can of worms. Yes. She said, what a can of worms. But these worms are easier to handle than the other worms. So we'll come back to the conclusion that we have. But that's just the preface it there, is that sometimes you have to pick the lesser of evils when trying to look for different explanations. So this is his example. It wasn't just a providential, by providential fiat that Napoleon lost. It was by having the natural order of the world that ended up in manifesting itself in a colder winter that led things to be the appropriate conclusion. Keep going.
When a person or an entire nation stands at the height of success and becomes haughty and glorifies in it and brings jealousy in the heart of those who see him, it will befall him that the wheel of fortune will turn upon him and bring him to unanticipated destruction. And the masses attributed this to Ayin Hara, and at times attribute this to the curse of enemies, while in truth the eye does not harm, nor do curses bring about bad things. Rather, the law is to God, and he decreed and established in the order of the causes of good and evil that the arrogance of man lays him low, while he of humble spirit will obtain honor.
All right, so it wasn't that God picked on Napoleon. It was Napoleon himself, by the way he rose and by the arrogance that he displayed, that triggered a natural response. Because the natural response was operating according to a supernatural law, not just the laws of thermodynamics and climate. but it was him. It wasn't that God singled him out and said, boop, you're going down. It was his own actions, his own behavior, triggered a response. All right, can of worms. Did you want to explain why it's a can of worms? Or is it a little less wormy?
No, it's so take out the king of Aritz and put in Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it take so long for the cold to come?
True. We often are going to disagree with the way that these things play out, but Hitler ruled for a fraction of the time of Napoleon. I know it didn't feel like that. And certainly for the Jewish people, on the whole, Napoleon was a much more positive force.
There were big arguments for that.
Than Hitler was. I mean, he brought about he triggered the emancipation of us from the ghettos. Whether or not the way that emancipation played out, thanks to how he did it, was overall beneficial for us or not is a whole other question. But he obviously did not have any intention directly against us. But he did have the intention of ruling the world under his heel, which is very similar to the intention of Adolf Hitler. And Hitler was stopped in about what, half the time of Napoleon, rather than the years of despotic rule. He was much bloodier in those times, thanks to the technology and machinery and industry that he was able to employ. So are we measuring by time? Are we saying that God was late with Hitler? Is that us with the 40 days saying, it's an hour late, so therefore I disagree with it?
You asked me that question, and I think about the meeting with Roosevelt. Drop the bombs.
Yeah, destroy the camps. Don't wait for the liberation. Destroy the camps. Yes, and that's trying to get a handle on the rightness of every action is impossible. Ultimately, the best example we have of this is the Book of Job. The brilliance of the Book of Job is that we know Job doesn't deserve what happens to him. We knew it. That's the thing that's so amazing about that book, is because all of us want to find some reason. We want to say, oh, it was the curse of that neighbor, or it was the Ayin Hara of the gypsy. It was something that caused the bad to happen. We want to find that, and we know from the Book of Job that there wasn't anything that caused him other than Satan trying to make a point, which he actually did successfully make. But we as the reader know that Job himself doesn't deserve it.
I may have read this wrong, but as I understood it, these other laws besides the natural law is already there.
Correct. It's in place.
The
upper wisdom. The arrogant will be brought low. That's a law of supernatural effect, according to Shadal.
But there is no time.
There's no time frame connected to that. There's no explanation of how that will happen. Correct. It's not, if you commit the crime of invading Russia, you will be brought low by winter. And if you make the crime of invading Egypt, you'll be brought low by the sun. There's no mechanical. It's a much more general principle. Exactly. But what Shadal is doing here is trying to preserve a notion that God's law does rule in this world, even though we don't see it continually or easily, or in many cases to our liking, and certainly in many cases not fast enough. But on the other hand, we also don't want to say that God is completely absent from this world, which would be the alternative that his generation was saying. Is you either have mass superstition and a ascription of miracles to everything as though we knew what God was about and what God was doing, or you say it's all just blind random chance and stuff happens. Shadal's trying to pick that middle can of worms.
And when we add superstition, I'm thinking about Mezuzah right now.
I mean, when we overlay superstition on other mitzvot or other actions, it's a problem. It's a big problem.
Or the Western Wall.
Well, to the Western Wall or mezuzah, there's so many things that are easily made more. As I mentioned, the segulot, industry out there, or the getting the Kabbalists to make you amulets and other things that are out there. These are very, very detrimental effects. Again, it goes back to this notion. The impetus and the desire is a necessary one. We want to feel that God's protecting us when we see the mezuzah. But that's not why we put a mezuzah on our door. But it's very easy to go ahead and believe it anyway. And to say, therefore, if something bad happened to me, it must be the mezuzah's fault. That, I had the wrong mezuzah, or the mezuzah wasn't kosher, or something had happened, the weevils had eaten it and I didn't notice. I mean, trust me, this is all stories and things that have been said to people in distress. You've gotten, your children can't get married, check your mezuzahs. Or someone had a car accident, check your mezuzah. I mean, how many people do you see who wear a mezuzah as an amulet? It didn't say to wear a mezuzah around your neck, but people wear them as a sign of their Jewish affiliation. That's fine. But as a sign of, by wearing this, I am somehow decreasing the chances of bad luck? No. That's golden calf business.
I even heard of a mezuzah that you could put on the dashboard of the car.
Oh, yes. Yep.
I was stunned at that one.
Now, to put a symbol of Judaism on the dashboard of your car so that you are mindful of Judaism and God while driving, which is not a bad idea. But to think the mezuzah will keep you from an accident rather than from careful driving, that is a bad idea. That is a bad idea. So these are not easy subjects. These are not easy ideas. And our ancestors wrestled with it, and their manifestation was a golden calf. When they were being drawn towards unhelpful solutions to real problems, they ended up with a golden calf. Now, most of us don't think about making idols in the classical definition of the word, but most of us do implement activities which duplicate the same effect. Right? We either treat our ritual objects as though they were amulets, even if we don't call them that. We'll treat services as a bargaining chip. God, if so-and-so recovers from this illness, I'll go to shul. Right? Not a bad idea to go to shul. Not a bad idea to pray for someone's recovery. But the rabbis even say in that particular issue, that they peg it with giving tzedakah if so-and-so recovers, they say as long as you don't regret the doing of the mitzvah, even if the person doesn't recover, it's okay if it helps motivate you and focus you. But as soon as you think of it as being a one-to-one deal, you've stepped across that line. Because you've allowed the Yetzer Hara to turn your relationship with God into an ATM. And it doesn't work. And that, to go back to your point, is there an okay form of idolatry? No, but there are okay things that are less than idolatry. That, just like the Ayin Hara, God has allowed us to continue to do because they can reinforce positive characteristics, but we have to be very careful. Personally, because of the lack of understanding of notions like Ayin Hara in the modern world, I do not recommend or advocate the use of the Ayin Hara as a principle in Jewish conversation, because I think that either you end up with people who mock it or people who believe it superstitiously, and very few that are willing to engage in what Shadal is asking for, as an understanding of this as being part of the laws of nature, not my deadly gaze. If someone curses you, Shadal says it means nothing. But if someone is moved to curse you, you should pay attention to that. Right? If someone stares at you with jealousy because you're lording it over the community of what you've got, their look is not going to hurt you. But the fact that they're looking at you like that should be a red flag that something's wrong. The fact that you want to be connected to God, nothing wrong with that. The fact that you're fulfilling that desire by building an idol or by acquiring amulets or other activities that are not correct, that's the red flag. And it's hard to walk that line, but that's what we've been called to do. So keep working, keep studying, keep thinking, and keep on trucking.